Good morning. It is good to be here this morning at Polishing the Pulpit. My wife and I drove in late last night, and I'm looking forward to this week and us sharing together. What a blessing this week is, I'm sure, for all of us. A young executive just had his big promotion. And I guess he had a lot on his mind about the meaning of life, and etc. And so that night he had a dream. And in his dream, he dreamt that he died, and dreams always seem to happen, or at least these kind of stories seem to always happen. He arrives with Peter talking to him about eternity. And so Peter says to him, would you like to go to heaven or to hell? And he says, well, I really haven't given a lot of thought to heaven or hell. And he says, could I kind of have a glimpse of the two and see which one I'd like to go to? And so Peter says, well, sure. And so this big giant screen pops up, and he begins to see a picture of hell. And it's a beach scene, and there are girls in bikinis, and guys that are well-built, and they're just having the best time. They got their coolers of beer, and after a great day at the beach, they close out the evening getting into nice sports cars to spend the evening together. And he says, okay, he said, that looked pretty good. Could I have a glimpse of heaven? And the camera pans over and shows heaven, and it's older people. They're calmly sitting in a nice park setting, and they're playing checkers. And the guy says, okay, I've seen enough. He said, I know for sure I want to go to hell. And so at that moment, the bottom falls out of where he's standing, and he falls into outer darkness. And there comes a cry back to Peter from that man saying, wait a minute, where are the babes? Where are the fast cars? Where's all the beer? And Peter says, oh, I forgot to tell you that was a demo tape sent from Satan. Now think about that for just a moment, and probably for those of us that are well grounded in the scriptures and our faith is very much alive and real to us, we can readily identify with that John 8 teaches us that Satan is the father of all lies. And Satan is going to try to reel us in any way that he can to deceive us. Now, we recognize that. We live in a world where we see the sin around, and we wish that people could see through the lies of Satan. But here's the question. Do we see through the more subtle lies that he places within our homes? Do we see through the more subtleness that literally chisels away at the very characteristic of holiness? I want to read to you a statement that was written. I found it in Sacred Marriage, and he quotes from an essay that was written in 1940. The title of this essay is The Necessary Enemy. Porter writes, as he takes a glimpse into a newlywed's thinking. And maybe for some of us, it's been a little while since we were newlyweds. But I want you to think back to maybe that first time that you came to the grips of the reality. Wow, everything's not perfect now that I'm married. Here is the way it's recorded here. This very contemporary young woman finds herself facing the oldest and ugliest dilemma of marriage. She is dismayed, horrified, full of guilt and forebodings because she is finding out little by little that she is capable of hating her husband, whom she loves faithfully. She can hate him at times as fiercely and mysteriously, indeed in terribly much the same way as often she hated her parents, her brothers and sisters, whom she loves. When she was a child, she thought she'd outgrown all this. But here it was again, an element in her own nature she could not control, or fear she could not. She would have to hide from her husband, if she could, the same spot in her feelings she had hidden from her parents. And for the same, no doubt, disreputable, selfish reason, she wants to keep his love. Have you thought about that as a selfish reason? To treat your spouse the way you treat them? I'm treating my spouse this way because I want to keep their love. You see, I feel better when they love me. I feel validated. I feel purpose. I feel fulfilled. I feel satisfied. Above all, she wants him to be absolutely confident that she loves him. For that is the real truth. No matter how unreasonable it sounds, and no matter how her own feelings betray them both at times, she depends recklessly on his love. How Satan works his way into our lives to try to convince us that those good and faithful Christians to whom we're married to, they can provide what God can provide. It's not true. Friends, we expect too much out of marriage too often. We marry because we want to be fulfilled when God tells us he is the only one that can fulfill us. We marry because we want to find a satisfaction when God is the only one that can provide the true and the ultimate satisfaction. And so it is when we look across at our spouse to receive some sort of almost atonement of blessings, when actually God has designed all of that to come from us looking up. And the way we treat our spouse, the way we love our spouse, the way we serve our spouse, the way we devote our life to our spouse is based wholly upon who our God is, not who our spouse is. And so we try to come to grips with this idea of holiness. If you were going to describe healthy relationships, how would you describe them? Now, we could mention just a few that literally, if we went around this room, we could probably have more than 100 characteristics. Easy. We wouldn't even have to struggle. We'd hear things like this. Oh, a healthy relationship is non-threatening. A healthy relationship is respectful, where they really truly respect each other. It's a trusting relationship. That has to be the foundation of a good, strong relationship. Oh, we're supportive of each other. We really help each other along. We're honest with each other. Our communication is open, and we can be true to each other. Responsible. Each individual within the home is carrying out their responsibilities, kind of one of the definitions of a functional family versus a dysfunctional family. Even in this group, if you had not heard the introduction thus far, and we said begin listing on a piece of paper characteristics of what a marriage should be, how long would you write before you would come to the word holy? I'm going to cut him open. Who is the first man or woman that looked at a corpse back hundreds and hundreds of years ago and said those words? You know, there had been so much speculation about what went on within a human body. Can you imagine the brave soul that first picked up a knife, looked over a corpse and said, I'm tired of speculating. I want to cut him open. There was a fellow, first name Andreas, in the 16th century that was granted many corpses of criminals. And it is his chart work of the human anatomy that has had a huge impact on the medical advancements since that time. Because he was one of the brave souls that said, let's get deeper. I want to cut him open. Let's find out really what are the organs. Let's look at a muscle skeleton. Let's look at the arteries. The first time that a skull was looked into, as a scalp was pulled back and the brain was examined. Friends, today, and then in very much a degree, but not to the same degree over the next few days, we're going to cut into marriage a little bit. And our goal is to pull back a little bit of the surface and go down to what God truly designed us to be individually. And when we come to grips with that, how it changes us as family members. And because of that, this lesson, and really not many of the other lessons, will be filled with, hey, these are 5 ways that you can get out of debt. Hey, here are 10 ways to keep your romance alive. Here are 5 ways to keep open, honest communication thriving. And friends, there's a place for all those. Those are wonderful topics. Those are topics we need to be talking about. But I just want to give you kind of a heads up. We want to go deeper to what moves those things. What's the fuel behind saying, I want an open, honest relationship? What's the fuel behind saying, I want to deal wisely with everything God has given me, including the finances? What's the fuel that says to a husband, I want to sit down and just listen to my wife at the end of a long day? What is the fuel? The fuel that pushes and drives, helps mold and build, not just a happy home. What's the fuel that builds a holy home? If you think back to the time that you were first married, and maybe there's some of you here that can easily think back to that, how many times did you hear the 6 months before you were married, and within the first year of your marriage, how many times did you hear the word happy? Oh, we do a good job of wishing people a happy marriage. Hope you guys are happy together. Oh, you're such a happy couple. I'm so proud for you. You guys, it's obvious you love each other because you're so happy. I guess there's nothing wrong with that. But isn't that a shame that not only that is the way the world describes couples, but that's the same way that Christians describe couples? Are we really that much the same? What do people, if you go out and ask people in the world, what do you want in a relationship? And they'll say, we want a happy marriage. You ask someone that's a Christian, what do you want? We want a happy marriage. Do we really want the same thing? Is that the way God designed it? Friends, I'm afraid we're missing the focus. We want a holy marriage. We want to be holy. It's a lifelong work, and it directly affects everything we do, and it will greatly, positively affect what we become and even the end result of our potential. And so as we think about this topic of holiness for a moment, I'd like for you to read along with me W.A. Tozer's writing where he says in an article that's entitled The Knowledge of the Holy. I'm not endorsing everything this man believed, but he does challenge us here with a very beautiful aspect of holiness. Whatever is holy is healthy. Evil is a moral sickness that must end ultimately in death. The formation of the language itself suggests this, with the English word deriving from the Anglo-Saxon hele, how meaning well, whole. God's wrath and his utter intolerance of whatever degrades and destroys. He hates iniquity as a mother hates the polio that takes the life of her child. Why does Romans 1, verse 18 say, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness? You look at a mother and you bring the disease of polio, especially in the day that he wrote this, would have taken the lives of so many young children, crippled so many others. And you imagine a mother, if she could see this disease as if it were an object, or if it were a characteristic, and if she could see her child moving toward it, can you imagine the disdain that she would have as she would yell out to her child, don't go near that, don't go near that. Why? Because I want my child to be happy. No, there's something much deeper. Don't go near that, don't go near that. Why? Because it will hurt you. Right now you have health. You have the potential to grow. You have the potential with your health to do so much more in your life. But if you come in contact with that disease, you are diseased, you are harmed, you are sick. You may very well die at that moment. You will be handicapped in a sense. You will be crippled. Mother, why do you not want me to play with this disease? Why do you not want me to contact this disease? And to us, that's so clear. Well, obviously, we love our children and we want them healthy. Now go back and think about God for a moment. God, what do you want me to be as a Christian husband? He's not going to throw out something so shallow as to say, I want you to be happy. He's going to go down to the core of who we're supposed to be and what will ultimately produce happiness. But happiness is only the result. God's going to say, I want you to be whole. I want you to be healthy. You see those sins, don't go near them. As a child would beg for polio not to come in contact with her, as a mother would beg for polio not to come in contact with her child, God would beg us. God, why is your wrath stirred against sin? I hate sin, God says, as much as a mother would hate polio. It hurts the people I love. It damages their holiness. Holiness is not all that easy to either understand, or maybe it's not that hard to understand. It's just hard to implement it into everything. Over these 4 days, we'll bring out various characteristics of holiness, and I warn you this morning intentionally, we'll spend just a short amount of time on the couple that we're studying this morning so that we can lay the groundwork of holiness that we will build off of for the rest of the week. And throughout the week, we'll still bring in various characteristics of holiness. When's the last time you were walking across a piece of dirt, a ground, and you thought to yourself, whoa, I better take off my shoes. This is pretty nice ground here. Hasn't happened lately, has it? Maybe you've gone into somebody's house and because of the way the house appeared, it was so nice, so immaculate. Maybe you thought to yourself as you entered, maybe I better pull off my shoes. Maybe other people in the house pulled off their shoes, and because of their behavior, you did too. But odds are you've never done that on a piece of ground. Why would anybody? Except Moses. Why would anybody? What if that ground was devoted to God? What if it was God that said, Moses, take off your shoes. You're standing on holy ground. Moses, you've been looking after those sheep 40 years all around here. And this ground has never been holy. But right now, this ground right here is devoted to a purpose. I have obtained possession of this ground. And I also have a people that I have obtained a possession of them. I've bought them. They're my own special people. They're holy. And I'm looking for a leader that will lead them out. And friend, as we try to grasp the idea of holiness, holiness deals in part with the idea that it is something that is owned by God, that is set apart for a special cause. Remember the book of Deuteronomy, whenever they were given the recipe for the incense that was to be burnt in the tabernacle, they were told exactly what the ingredients were to be and the exact recipe of what measure each one was to be. And then they were told, do not use this outside of the tabernacle. Do not use this in your own homes, because they would profane. And that's interesting. Holy. Don't profane it. Don't make it common. What is devoted to God, do not bring it down to an everyday human or fleshly way. When you read the book of Leviticus over and over, you see the readings of the holiness of God, and you also see, don't profane the name of God. The two go together. When we think about that, we think about, well, how does that pull over into the New Testament? Because we don't have a holy piece of ground in the New Testament, do we? So what does that mean? As we think about what that means, let's quickly think about the word hagios in the Greek that is translated each time at least 3 different ways, but it's the same word. Okay, the very same word. Many times that word is translated holy. Other times that very same word is translated sanctified. And other times that very same word, many times, is translated saint. Now think about how that describes us. How we're called in Romans 12:2 to offer our bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God. What does that mean when we are called to be holy? When we are asked to be sanctified? When we are described as those who are sanctified, we are saints. It's the idea that we no longer belong to the world. And sometimes we say in Bible classes, how oftentimes have we asked the question, what does sanctified mean? And someone says, set apart. And we say, very good answer, and we move right along. And we know that in a sense, if you wanted to be very, very elementary, that is true. But friends, aren't we missing it? Think about this morning. We could take 2 of these chairs, and we could set them on the stage together this morning together. And by using that definition, set apart, we could say, are these chairs sanctified? No. And then we could take a chair and we could set one on this side and we could go way over here and we could set another one. And then we could ask the question, are these chairs sanctified? Oh, no. Yes, they are. Yes, they're set apart now. Is that really all it means? Is that really all sanctified means is we need to be set apart? Okay, so I was in the world and now all the Lord wants me to do is put some distance between the world and me. Lord, how much distance? Is just an arm length okay? Or Lord, if all you're wanting is some distance, maybe I could get right over on the line. Is that okay right there? No wonder we get these questions from our youth. No wonder we adults wonder it. They just don't ask it. Because we've missed the true meaning of holiness and to be sanctified and to be a saint. We're not just set apart. Yes, we're different from the world. Why? Because we are God's special people. Literally, we are owned. We are possessed by God. We, in that sense, become the holy ground. Now, when one is owned by God, using this Old Testament coming into the New Testament principle, what does that mean? Now we have a purpose. And that purpose is devoted to God, and we can't profane it. Number 1 best-selling book ever outside of the Bible. Many of you have already said the answer in your mind. The Purpose-Driven Life. An amazing, amazing success in sales. By no means would I endorse some of the teachings in that book. I bring that up as an illustration to say, when we say people aren't hungry anymore, I don't think we're being honest with ourselves. People want to know their purpose. One author said, every heart has a hole in it the shape of God. Well, what happens when we take that heart that wakes up every morning and goes out and makes $250,000 a year and stares at their luxury automobiles and their vacation homes and still lays their head on the pillow at night and says, there has to be more to life than this? They don't have healthy relationships with their spouses, perhaps. I'm not saying just because someone is wealthy they don't. But in this illustration, let's say they don't. They don't have a healthy relationship with their child. They don't have healthy relationships with their friends. They maybe do not even have healthy relationships at work. Why do they have that hole in their heart? Because they are not holy. The wellness, the wholeness is not there. Money can't provide it. Power can't provide it. And we have all of these people all across America that they hear the words. There is a book out there that really gives purpose to life. And they say, I want it. I've given the last 20 years of my life thinking money could buy it. And I'm figuring out it can't. I've tried to serve my wife and serve my wife and serve my wife. And you know what I found out? I still have a hole in my heart. What about these parents that dote over their children? and still lay in bed with a hole in their heart at night. Why? Money, wives, husbands, children, grandparents, they aren't going to provide holiness, wellness. We look to places for fulfillment that God has never designed. You remember the god, pagan god, Ammonites, Molech? Calf's head. We believe the hands would be outstretched. A fire would be built underneath them. You know what they said this god was? They said this was the god that possessed their land. Interesting. Who was the God of Israel? The God that possessed their nation, a holy nation, my holy people. And so they have their God that possesses them, and Israel had their God that possessed them. And what did this God ask? Many historians believe that what this God asked was occasionally for them to bring their babies and lay them in the hand of Molech and light a fire until they would say, the baby has given up the ghost. Think healthy for a minute. How healthy was it for that baby that their mother and father worshiped Molech? Wasn't healthy at all, was it? How healthy do you think it was for them as a society? Let's go back to Israel. Everything that God asked of Israel, how healthy was it that God was their God, that God was the one that possessed them? Let's skip over several slides to Leviticus. Look, if you will, Leviticus 19. Leviticus 19. Notice this passage here as we look in verse 1 and 2. And then we scan just a few of the other things. In Leviticus 19, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to all the congregation of the children of Israel, and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." Now that's interesting there that we see the command that they are to be holy. Now keep in mind, what is holiness? It is sanctified, but it's not just a separation. We're separating because God owns us. And then because God owns us, notice we are to become holy. Peter quotes this same thing. And so we have the idea here. Now note this fact. God is holy. God doesn't look around and say, I think I want to take on the characteristic of holiness. He is holy. And so what we strive to do is we are separated. We take upon ourselves the holiness of God. Now, what is that going to do? As you read the following verses, and I'll just read a few of them. Look at 3 and 4. Every one of you, because the Lord, keep in mind, master, servant, Lord, because God is your Lord, because God is holy, He's calling you to be holy, to come to Him, to be a possession of His. Now notice this, because of that, every one of you shall revere his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols, nor make for yourselves molded gods. I am the Lord your God. Okay, if every one of the children of Israel said, okay, God's holy, I want to be a possession of God, I want to be holy too, how's that going to bless their family? Can you imagine if every family in America today, every family had a godly mother and father and children that said, I want to honor my mother and father? Can you imagine how different our society would be immediately? Why? Because holiness is healthy. Holiness blesses a family. So here he begins by saying at the beginning of Leviticus 19, I want you to be holy because I'm holy. In other words, it's going to help you. You're going to be healthy. And I'll start out with your families. And then he says, I'm also going to mention the relationship between God and man. Don't put gods in the middle of that. Keep it holy. Keep it healthy. It's going to bless you. And then if we read on in verse 5, 6, and 7, he talks about sacrifices and when they could eat the sacrifice. Remember, after the third day, they could never eat the sacrifice. Why? Well, today we know about germs. And we know about the sickness that would take place if they ate that meat. God is literally here giving them a law because he's holy to say this is going to help you physically. And then when we read down in verse 9 and 10, he even talks about the harvest. And you leave the corners. Remember, that was because of the poor people. Did holiness help a society? Absolutely. Their society was blessed because there were holy people living there. Because you live on the street you live on, are other people blessed? And if they're not, I have to stop and ask myself, am I really holy? Am I really a possession of God? Because the community I live in, am I a blessing to that community? And then we even read down, we could look at a lot more, but verse 14 even talks about to not curse the deaf and not put a stumbling block in the way of the blind. And so God is even pointing out there that even in our society, when there are people that are hurting, they're disabled, they're limited, if they live among holy people, it's going to be better for them. It's going to be healthy. To be whole in that sense. Now think how that translates to our families. What is the greatest gift that we can give to our family? But for us to be holy. As I think about that, I think about actually individually, a couple of guys right now I'm trying to help with pornography addiction. And I think about one that described the other day how he said, at first it was just me. And it was just when I was stressed, it was my way to relieve stress. He said for years that's all it was. He said then I realized it was destroying my marriage. This unhealthiness, bleeding over to hurt someone else. Then I realized that it was affecting the way I was parenting. It's affecting more. With his job, he's in contact with a lot of people every day. He's a teacher. He said, I used to make a strong stand for righteousness in school. I tell the kids, even though I'm in a public school, I tell them who God is and how they need to live. And he said the last few years, the deeper I got into that, every time I would start to say something, while I was saying it, I would say to myself, you hypocrite, you don't have a right to say this. You see, then it began to affect the health that he could have brought to his students. Friends, that's just one example of every sin we commit, how it carves away at holiness, which in actuality is carving away our health. We so oftentimes talk about everything we want in a marriage, and we talk about us, and that makes sense. But today, I want you to think about this. You want a great marriage? Work on your holiness, where everything you do is because of the God you serve. As we think about that, I'd like for you to turn with me to Genesis, the 24th chapter, and we'll mention, hey, Alan, a quarter after? Is that right? What? Okay. Notice a couple of things in Genesis 24th chapter. Genesis 24th chapter. We have an intersection in life. Life brings us intersections where once we pass through that intersection and we make a decision about that intersection, things will not ever be the same again. The longest discourse about a burial other than Jesus Christ is Sarah in the Bible. That gives us insight to what God might think about giving honor to the dead. He promotes that we see in the scriptures. And so Abraham has buried his wife. Now any of us have gone through tremendous losses in our life. That tugs at our heart. We have some kind of thought of what poor old Abraham was going through. The question is, as he went through that intersection of life, his life was never going to be the same again. What was he going to do? Was he going to allow the hurt, the grief, and the pain to make his decisions for him, to drive him or fuel him, or was he going to look to God? Listen to this simple statement. It may not make sense at first, but if you'll jot this down and the next time you're hurting, if you'll think about this, it just might make a difference. It hurts to hurt, but it's not bad to hurt. Too oftentimes, we make terrible decisions when we're in the depths of pain because we think that we have to do something to escape the pain. It hurts. I've got to run away from it. When what we ought to be doing in actuality is in the midst of the hurt, look to God and say, I want to remain holy no matter what. It's interesting in this time of hurt that Abraham became very sober in his thinking to say, and I'm implying this, it may not, this is the way I read this. It's as if during this time he became sober in his thinking to think, I remember that covenant that God made with me. And when Sarah was beyond her childbearing years, this child Isaac was born, and he is to be the father of a great nation. We better make sure that he finds a godly wife. You see how he used that intersection in life to say, let's do something holy. Let's perpetuate this holiness to the next generation. And you probably know that story in the 24th chapter as he calls the servant in verse 1 and 2. And it's his oldest servant. In other words, he chose the one that he could trust the most. And he asked him to give what would be one of the highest swearing vows that it would be. It's odd to us today, but put your hand under my thigh. And he made that servant do that to say that he would not take a wife for his son from the Canaanites, but that he would go back to his homeland and choose a wife from there. And they load up the 10 camels, and he starts on that long journey to find a wife. Now notice what he's looking for here is not a particular person. He is looking for a kind of a wife. In other words, he's looking for holiness. I do not want one that is of the pagan gods. I want one that is whole. I want one that is spiritual. I want one that is healthy. And then he sends him on his way. And as he goes on his way, he's sobered first and questions, what if she wouldn't come? And he relieves him of the responsibility there. If she doesn't, that's fine. Just don't choose a wife from the Canaanites. And then he begins this prayer. Let's look in the 24th chapter in verse 12. Then he said, O Lord God of my master Abraham, please give me success this day and show kindness to my master Abraham. What a beautiful thought. He knew the responsibility he had to find a wife. But Abraham and this servant sees every bit of this search for a spouse through the eyes and through the reality of holiness. I want God to grant this. Many of us have already chosen our spouses. The question is, would the same prayer be for us today? Lord, help me to be the holy spouse. The question I need to ask myself, if my spouse were praying for holiness in their marriage, would I be an answer to that prayer? Do you see here in Genesis, still the same chapter 24, notice when she agrees to come and to be the wife of Isaac. Notice in 48, and I bowed my head. This is a servant. I bowed my head and worshiped the Lord and blessed the Lord God of my master Abraham, who had led me in the way of truth to take the daughter of my master's brother for his son. He's putting together a couple here. And the way they have approached this is so much of a God event that when it happens, he says, I just have to stop and worship. And then he says that, talking about her, that God has led me in the way of truth. And that's the question. Am I the way of truth to my spouse? In other words, am I that way of holiness? Am I the way of truth to my children? You remember how he identified her? The servant's heart. Would you give me a pitcher of water? And she quickly said, not only that, I'll give you pitchers of water for your 10 camels. Holiness. When we consider holiness, let's go back to that slide and close with that one on the triangle. The beautiful aspect of holiness as we see it in the Scriptures is you and I can look left and right to our spouse on the base of this triangle And we can even be very unselfish in what we have to offer to each other. And the truth is, we may have a good secular home. You know, His Needs, Her Needs. I love that book. I think there's some helpful things. But if that is our motive, we are not holy. I want to fulfill her needs, and I want to hope that she fulfills my needs, and that's what we're striving for. No. Our focus and vision has to be upward. I want to be holy. And whatever I offer to her, it's going to be because God has placed me in that place to offer it. Now, with that, am I going to fulfill needs? Yes, but not because of who she is, but because of who my God is. Now notice, if we both focus upward, as the years grow, we're going to grow closer to God. And all the while we're growing closer to God, isn't it interesting what happens on that diagram? The more we go closer to God, the more we grow closer to each other. And friends, that's when holiness is seen in its greatness. Let's bow.